first book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello everybody in person and on Zoom, and welcome. I'm Mark Pinto here, the Adult Services Director at Phoenixville Public Library, and we are pleased to have with us tonight local author C.J. McGroarty, who will speak about her debut novel, which is set against the backdrop of the American Revolution. How timely, 4th of July tomorrow. And you'll learn tonight about the inspiration and history behind it. Our guest tonight is a former reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer and also a Pushcart Prize nominee. Her work has appeared in a variety of literary journals and magazines. You'll have the opportunity, folks on Zoom, to unmute yourself or type in the chat at the end of her presentation tonight. So please, everyone on Zoom and in the room, welcome our author, C.J. McGroarty.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you to all the Zoomers and all the roomers here. On Zoom and in the room. I'm very happy to be here. Yes, we're on the 3rd of July here, right? So tomorrow is the big day. And of course, this story is set during the Revolutionary War. And in this area, in Philadelphia area, as we all know, there's lots and lots and lots of history related to the founding of the country. I've always been real interested in the Revolutionary era. I just think it's a fascinating time. I think it was a fun thing to write a story that has a woman as a main character in the story. It's funny, when I was looking at Revolutionary War literature, fiction that is, I saw a lot of children's stories, and I saw a smattering of other kinds of fiction, but I wasn't seeing a lot of fiction around a woman protagonist, a female protagonist. So I think I should add to that a little bit with my book. I will say that this is a work of fiction, however it was inspired by, when I was a reporter, I went on a story, and it was about an effort to preserve an old colonial farmstead in Thornbury. And there was nothing there really but ruins, some stone walls and stuff, but you know, it was a family who lived there named the Frasers, and they were farmers in the 18th century, and they had a few children. Percifer Fraser was the husband, Polly Fraser the wife, and he went off to fight in the Revolution, and she stayed back on the farm to make things run, which was what a lot of women had to do then, right? They had to stay back and make sure they kept the household going. And that just sort of planted a seed in my mind about having a story with a woman who is on the home front.
Excuse me, they said they can't hear you very well.
Oh.
No, there's one person who has asked.
Oh.
Yeah, the microphone is right there, so everybody
Okay.
should be able to hear.
All right.
I just wanted to make sure.
I hope that you can hear me, okay? I'll try to speak up. However, yeah, so, I'm sorry, I got off track.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay, that's okay. So I thought I would do a reading, and then, you know, open up to questions and discussion. Okay. Perhaps it was some trick of Providence, what happened the morning my son's voice came bugling through the air. That morning that feels like yesterday, but if you were to count the years, would prove to be a long time ago. Or perhaps it was preordained. I can only tell you forthrightly as I may, how my life, my old life, you might call it now, was swept away as capriciously as a leaf in the wind, and some other life put in its place. I was living in the countryside, the war in its second year, my husband gone for a soldier, and the three of us, me, my son Jamie, and my dear friend Naomi, were making do on the farm as best we could, unmolested for the most part by the fight but mindful of our dwindling coin and supplies. It was a mild June morning, the sun inching up in a pewter sky, and I'd just stepped out of the hen house with a basket of warm brown eggs, my mind wandering to dinner, a roasted hen with thyme. When suddenly there was Jamie hurrying towards me, his hand raised in an urgent summons. "Mother," he cried, "come quickly." He drew up in front of me, our dog Fife at his heels, and turned to look behind him. "It's a man," he said, as if I too might see. But I saw no one. "Where? What man?" I said, straining to peer around the corner of the house, imagining a rider waiting just out of sight. A rider with a letter bearing unhappy news, the kind of news that tells a woman she is no longer wife but widow. A chill of dread washed over me as I tugged at my son's shoulder and I pulled him around to face me. "Jamie, what man?" "In the carriage house. I think he might be dead." "Dead?" He yanked at my arm. "Come see." I set down my basket and followed him, thinking surely he was mistaken. Our farm was not the sort of place you might find by accident, and hard even to find by intention. There was that night, about a year since, when one of Matthias Haskell's farm hands had taken too much whiskey and wandered down the lane and made camp under our big sycamore. When we found him in the morning, he was still quite stewed, and Malky had had to load him into the wagon and drive him back to the Haskells. Perhaps this scenario had repeated itself, only this time, if Jamie was correct, the poor fellow might not wake up. He slowed his steps at the carriage house and turned to wave me in, and a moment later we were standing in the dim space behind our carriage, my son pointing down at, yes, a man indeed, slumped against the rear wall. "You see," he declared, his claim now proven. "Judas," I whispered, "I see." My heart began to hammer at this odd scene before me, a man lifeless as a sack of flour on the dirt, head hanging slack, one leg of his breeches torn and soaked black with blood, where someone had assailed him. Under the injured leg, a dark puddle was seeping into the earth. Was he really dead? I gathered my resolve and stepped closer. Not a farmhand, that much was certain, as evidenced by the clean broadcloth of his frock and the polished brass buttons of his waistcoat. "Sir," I called out to him, and when he made no response, I stooped and shook him by the shoulder and called out again, "Sir!" "Is he dead, Mother?" Jamie asked, breathless, curious as any 12-year-old boy would be. I pressed my finger to the man's neck. A faint pulse tapped beneath the chilly skin. "No, not yet, but you'd better fetch Naomi, quick." As my son hurried off with the dog, I turned back to the oblivious man and tried again to rouse him, again to no avail. Through the ragged hole in the breeches, a gruesome wound oozed, flecked with bits of wool and dirt. A ball wound, for only a ball would rip the flesh in such a way, and the breeches as well. I tugged the cloth away from the wound to get a better look, and found the wool to be of a fine grade, a smooth weave mixed with cotton. A man would pay a few shillings for breeches like those, and for the boots, which were fine as well. A gentleman, was he? But what were shillings or fine boots to this poor gentleman now? For surely his wound would fester, and then the fever would set in and burn him up like a piece of kindling, if loss of blood did not dispatch him first. And then, what? We would have a dead man on our hands. I stood up and wiped my palms on my skirt. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The rough weave of the linen scraped my skin, and again I wiped, harder this time. 1, 2, 3. You see, the number 3, 3 for this and 3 for that, had become my remedy for the frets that came upon me since we'd moved to the woods 3 years hence, for the devils that robbed me of my sleep. Behind me, footsteps scuffled on the dirt, and a moment later Naomi was beside me, Jamie and Fife at her heels. "And what have we here?" she said, her voice peppered with the choppy traces of her foreign tongue. A voice I would know anywhere, uniquely hers. She lowered her wiry frame, and with the casual authority that had come from years as a midwife, she pinched the man's cheek, then struck it hard, all to no result. Someone tries to send you to God. Or the devil. I gestured toward the bloody leg. He's been shot, hasn't he? Jamie said. Naomi kneaded the wound, then dipped her fingers in a dark puddle on the dirt. Some hours have passed, she murmured, as if to herself. And she straightened up with a soft grunt. If the ball has come out, we do not have to dig. No, no digging, I said, distracted by the questions, pluming like smoke in my mind. Who was this man? And what foul business had got him shot? And would that business follow him to our door? Okay, I'm gonna stop there, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so that's an introduction for you to the story, so you can see that Clara Fletcher is on the farm with her son, Jamie, and her dear friend Naomi, who's a midwife, and her husband is off in the fight, as she says, and they are just trying to live their lives and survive, hoping the war will end, of course, which is what people always do in these situations. Yeah, so she'll have some adventures as the story goes on, and we'll meet more people in Clara's life, and so on. So, but I like to give people an opportunity to ask me questions. Sometimes I wear an outfit that's colonial. I don't have it tonight, but sometimes people ask me about clothing. But yeah, so I think that anything that you would want to ask me about the book or the writing of the book or anything involved, please do. I'd be happy to talk about it.
Folks on Zoom, feel free to unmute or type in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat.
Okay.
Man, because I read the book and really liked it.
Oh, thank you.
And there's some Native American characters in the book.
Mhm.
So how did you find out about what Native Americans were like back during the Revolution?
I was going to actually ask if you could talk
Okay.
about the research that you did for the book.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. So there's a couple of points to cover. One of them generally research, the other one the Native Americans. Then I wanted to have Native Americans in the book. I felt that it would be a good addition, and I wanted to pay attention to the fact that the white settlers living in the area, who had come into the area and settled the land, were on previously owned land, if you can call it owned, by the Native Americans, and I thought it would be a good thing to include there. Now, I already knew something about, I'm not an expert on the Lenni Lenape Indians in this area, but they were, William Penn had dealings with the Lenni Lenapes, and they were in this area quite a bit, the area from, say, Delaware, Maryland, up through Pennsylvania and New York. So they were the ones I was kind of envisioning for this story. The settlers and the Lenni, they did have occasion to interact sometimes. The Lenni traded with white settlers and so on. They fished and they hunted in the area. And so they were somewhat more accustomed to white settlers and the lives they were making here, more so than, say, Native American tribes in the West. Now, at the time of the American Revolution, the Native Americans in this area, a lot of them had started to go west, and by that I mean into sort of western Pennsylvania, Ohio area. They had started to kind of drift west because this area was becoming kind of full of white settlement. So a lot of them did move. So, and I did do some research on the Lenni Lenape. I was thinking about putting in some Lenni Lenape language into the book, but I chickened out on that, and I didn't do it. But the Lenni in the book that you'll see do, at least one of them does speak English, as you know, the young man. So he's kind of, and straddling two worlds. But as far as research goes, research in a book of historical fiction, of course, is very important. You want to portray as accurately as you can the life and times of the period. It's impossible to read everything and know everything and get it all into the book. In fact, one thing that I was aware of as I did research was I don't want to put all my research in the book, because then it'll just sound like it's a research book, right? So it's a lot of times it's like, how do you decide how much to put in? And I think it's good to put in touches, you know, that show the life. Like, how did they live, what did they have on the farm, you know, and so on. And what were their concerns in life? What were their practices and customs? You know, so yeah, research in a variety of ways. Of course, I have collected a big shelf of books I have at home. This on the American Revolutionary era and the colonial period, books about women. It was fun to read some letters. I read some of Abigail Adams' letters. I wanted to, it's fun to read letters because they're personal, and you get a sense for what people are thinking and feeling, and also how they spoke to each other, you know. It gives you a sense of the language when you read a letter, or, you know, some primary document. So yeah, so research always very important in a book like this, yeah. And fun, and you can go down a rabbit hole with that. So once you start looking at something, then you get attracted to some other thing there, and you keep going, even though you're not going to use it in your book. But it's always good to find things out. Anybody else?
Someone on Zoom is asking, are there descriptions of kitchen tools and cooking in the book?
Oh, yes, yes. We do see the kitchen is, it's funny how the kitchen always has been, right? Kind of a hub of the house, or a place where things are happening. There is a kitchen in the book, and we do see Naomi and Clara in that kitchen quite a bit. Cooking was something that took you all day to do, and you spent, if you were the one doing it, you spent a lot of time doing it. Of course, you didn't have a giant market, so everything came from your own, you know, steam. You had to do it yourself, everything. Now, you do see in the book, there's a kitchen garden that Naomi and Clara work in. They have a kitchen garden, and if you lived, particularly if you lived out, this would have been kind of the middle of nowhere. It's not like that today, of course, but back then there wouldn't have been a lot around. And so you'd have a kitchen garden because you needed to have your vegetables and maybe some berries and melons and fruit or whatever. You would grow, they grow a lot of the same things that we grow now. You know, the squashes and carrots and beets and all of that. So they grew a lot of what we grow now, but they had to grow it in their gardens. And kitchen gardens could be as large as they needed to be. So if you had a lot of people to feed, you had a big kitchen garden. And if you had not too many, then maybe you didn't have such a big garden. But it was very important because that was your sustenance. The other thing that you would do, of course, the food that you might have would be chickens. You'd have chickens on the farm, so you would maybe have roasted hen. Of course, you'd have eggs from the chickens. You would have dairy cattle. Now, it depends, of course, on what you can afford. Can you afford to have a pig or two? Maybe you would have that. So you could go hunting. If you were a good shot, maybe you'd get some venison or rabbit or something like that, right? So yes, cooking, food, very important. Baking bread, you would bake a lot of bread. Bread would be sustenance food for you back then. Well, it is now, right? People can't imagine the world without bread, and so, yeah, so bread, and somebody asked me about alcohol one time when I was talking. Did they really drink that much alcohol? I said, yes, they did. Because there just wasn't that much to drink in the 18th century. You know, you go into the supermarket now, you got aisles full of bottled drinks and so on. In the 18th century, you had milk from cows, which you get your milk and cream from cows. People didn't tend to just drink lots and lots of milk. And you had tea. You had things that you would, you know, make from water, like tea and ale and beer and different kinds of spirits. So you would have that. And of course, wines and so on, punches. Even children drank what they called small beer sometimes, children of a certain age. Because, you know, you just didn't have a lot of good water to drink, right? We turn on the tap now and we have water. But back then, you didn't have a lot of good water. If you were in the city, you didn't have much good water. Out in the country, you have a well or a cistern. So you would have better water. But, you know, water out of a stream, something like that, sometimes it's got bacteria in it. So not a lot of good water available. So you had what you had, yeah. And that's part of the reason I think they drank a lot of tea. And they drank coffee, too, yeah. So I hope that answers your question. In the book, they eat a lot of chicken, because that's what they have available to them. Clara's not going to go out hunting with her Brown Bess musket and bag a deer. So they're eating eggs and chicken and stuff from the garden. And you would prepare food for the winter, beans, for instance. So you grow a lot of beans, and you would take the beans and you would put them in a crock with a lot of salt, because salt retards bacteria. So you would have beans. Maybe if you were lucky, you could have beans through the winter. If you had a lot of beans, you take them out when you want to use them, you wash them off, and you cook them. Yeah, cabbages, they would put those up for the winter. Onions, apples. They have an apple orchard in the book, so they make cider at one point after they've harvested them. Speaking of what to drink, they make cider out of the apples as a special kind of seasonal treat. I hope I answered that question sufficiently for whoever had that.
I have another one from Zoom. So she says, I have read the book and enjoyed it. What was the process of getting published, and did your background as a reporter help in the process?
Oh, thank you for that. Yes. Well, the process for getting published was to, first of all, write the manuscript and rewrite it about 25 times. And then, or maybe more. How many times did I write the beginning? A lot. Anyway, yeah, so I did shop this around to agents. The thing to know right now is that publishing has changed a lot in the last 20 years. A lot. A lot in the last 10, but it was changing before that. So I looked for an agent. I had a little interest from a few agents, and I had one that actually almost, and then I had a publisher, Bookouture, who was interested, but they ended up not taking it. So you have to be prepared for stops and starts and trying to get, you know, trying to get it out there and see who wants it. And you will get rejected. I got rejected many times. I have a thick skin, it's okay. But you just have to keep trying. So what do you do when you don't have an agent? Well, you look around at small publishers. And I mentioned how things have changed in the publishing world. One of the things that's changed, there are more small presses and publishers now than there used to be. They've come in to fill this void because technology will allow almost anybody to publish a book, right? So you can publish a book on your own, self-publishing. You can go through, a small publisher or an agent. If you're lucky, you get maybe some more attention. So I put it out to some small publishers, and Atmosphere Press in Texas was interested. So I said, okay, let's go, and that's what happened. Yeah. Did I remember all the parts of that question? I hope so.
Yeah. Did your experience as a reporter help?
Oh, yes. Yeah, okay. So being a reporter is a fun, very educational job. I learned a lot as a reporter. I also listened to people a lot, because you interview people and they talk to you, and you ask questions and you learn things, and you listen to how people speak. And so, and you go out in the world and you just see people and you hear them. And I think that was beneficial to me in writing this book, because it gave me a sense of how people talk. Now people in the 18th century they spoke a little different than we do now. But, it's good when you have an exposure to people. I think it's very helpful for developing character, no matter what time period. And also it's good for research, because when you're a reporter, again, what's one of the things you have to do besides talking to people all the time? Well, you need to look things up, and you need to find out a little bit more about what you're writing about. So then you have to go off and do some research on that. So that was, I think I carried that as a useful tool into my fiction writing. Yes. Yeah. Anybody else?
Janice, on Zoom, you have your hand raised. Did you want to unmute?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, the question I had was about the language you use. I read a book recently about the American Revolution. It started in Connecticut and actually did go down through Philadelphia. And it was really about the war itself, but kind of a gruesome thing, but it was someone I knew, so that's why I felt I'd read it. But the language was really how I imagine they spoke, like a lot of yees and different language. How was your book written? Do you bring in the vernacular of those days?
Okay, thanks for asking about the language. Yeah, well, I think there were regionalisms. Even today we have regionalisms, right? There were regionalisms then for how people might have spoken up in northern New England as opposed to down in the South, and it's still true today, I'm sure. So, yeah, I don't have yees in the book. I do have one spot where there's a Quaker woman that Clara meets in Philadelphia, and she says "thee," because it's sort of an old Quakerism. I didn't want to, and this is an interesting question all around. How do I kind of portray the language of the period without being too esoteric about it? I don't want it to sound stilted or kind of weird to the the modern reader. So how do you do that? Well, you give a flavor of how people spoke, and you try to be true to the time period. I will say this: I looked up a lot of words in the dictionary because the dictionary will give you, right? It'll give you a definition, but one of the other things it gives you is the etymology or the history of the word. And every time I had a question in my mind about a word, and would they have used that word in the 18th century, I went to the dictionary and I looked it up. And I would find, to my surprise sometimes, oh, well, no, they didn't use that word. So it didn't actually come into being until 1830 or something. So you have to be careful, and you really do have to do your homework as far as the language goes, because you don't want a lot of anachronistic language in your historical fiction. It stands out, and boy, you know, I'm sure people are just ready to call you on it as soon as you know, use a word that's you know, not from the 18th century or whatever. So yeah, so it was kind of a combination. Like I said, I also would read documents or letters from that time to hear how people sounded, and I have some little notes and letters in the book, in the story. So I thought to myself, well, how am I going to spell things? Because in the 18th century, there was no uniform lexicon, right? There was no Merriam-Webster. People just spelled things the way they thought they should be spelled. And that was that. So I didn't want my spelling and my grammar to be too perfect in those little snippets of writing that I have in the book, of letters and so on. So I didn't want it to look like something would look today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to reading it.
Oh, thank you.
So how can folks on Zoom get your book?
Yeah, so if you want to get the book, you can go to Amazon.com, the monster bookstore of the world, and Barnes & Noble, or bookshop.org. Yes, yeah, it's available in Kindle and in hard copy.
Right.
Yes, yeah. Anybody else have any other questions about the time period or the writing or anything like that?
So was the setting Pennsylvania now?
Yes, the setting is Pennsylvania, it's Chester County. And it is, I imagine to be somewhere between, say, Berwyn area and some sort of Radnor-ish, Newtown Square-ish area. I don't have a particular, you know, spot, but in that area, sort of between the two roadways. Now, in the 18th century, they did have roadways into the city. They had Lancaster Pike, the Lancaster Road, and they also had the road out of Westchester or Turk's Head. So she's kind of in between those two. So she has her pick for where she wants to go. Anybody else? There is an Irishman in this book. His name is Declan. And I also wanted to have somebody from Ireland in the book because I thought I wanted to have a little bit of a kinship with Declan about England and its mighty power and what it does to its colonies. So that's why I did that, so she and he could sort of compare notes a little bit.
Question from Zoom, will you write another book?
I sure will. I actually have several books I want to write. I'm working on one now. It's a supernatural mystery, and it is set in the Philadelphia suburbs, and it involves a timeline in the present and a timeline in the 18th century. And it is about a woman who moves into an old 18th century house, and you can probably guess what happens after that. She has some encounters in the house. So it's a supernatural, I won't call it a thriller, it's more like a mystery. So I'm kind of finishing up that manuscript now, and then I'll be trying to find agent or publisher. Yeah.
Gwyn on Zoom has hand raised. Do you want to?
Yes, I was just wondering, is your book available at local bookstores like Reed's and Company in Phoenixville?
Well, thank you for asking that. It's not in Reed's and Company right now. I would like to have it in Reed's and Company. I need to put my mind to that. I wanted to speak there at Reed's and Company, but I wasn't having any luck doing that. So it's available at Main Point Books in Wayne, but I don't have any other bookstore right now for where it is. Yeah, that's the other thing that's changed a lot about publishing. So local bookstores have shrunk to a very small number, right? There aren't many of them. Of course, online business is the huge monster there. So, yeah, it's kind of.
Would it be at Barnes and Noble?
They would not stock it.
Oh,
They don't stock it, Barnes and
I see.
Noble. It's available on their website,
oh,
but not in their store.
okay, thank you.
Yes. Did you have a question too?
I was just gonna compliment you on your story, the way you read your book. You are an excellent storyteller,
Oh, thank you.
because, I mean, I've heard other people read their books and it's kind of like more plain, and you just made it very, very interesting, and you read very well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, reading, and that's another part of the book process, right? Is when you go out to see people, you need to read it. And so it's hard to figure that out, It's intimidating for a lot of people to read in front of people, right? And I understand that totally. But I think if you're gonna present your book, you need to give it some life, right? And I'm very, very invested in this story, and I feel the characters deeply. So I wanna put that out, and
Everything came across.
oh, thank you, and share that. Thank you very much.
And now I gotta read it to find out who that guy was.
I know, you have to find out what's going on there with good old Dick. You read it. Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, there is a love story at the heart of this story. I mean, the overarching story, of course, is we're on a farm, the revolution is going on, it's not going very well, who knows what the future holds kind of thing, and people are just trying to keep going. But inside of that, you have Clara's personal life and her, all of her, her baggage, I guess, and what, how she feels and what she thinks, and, her encounter with Declan. And so there's a love story there that is really kind of the nut around which everything's happening.
So is there some reason you used your initials and not your
Oh,
first name?
that's interesting. Why do I use my initials instead of, people have asked me that. Oops, I keep threatening to send that over. People have asked me that. I want, even though this is a story that probably appeals more to women, I think, than it would to men, although I have had some male readers. But I wanted to just make it a little generic, like CJ, is it a man or is it a woman,
Mhm.
But of course, there's a picture of me in the book, so it's no mystery. But yeah, I just like the idea of the initials, I think. CJ, I was thinking about a pen name, actually, and I decided, I was very close to doing a pen name, I decided not to. A friend of mine said, well, it's your book, don't you want people to know that it's you who wrote it and all of that, and there are certain problems with pen names and so on. So I just went for my own name, but I did the initials. A little more mysterious.
Divulge to everybody here what your first name is?
My name is Cynthia Jane, in case you're wondering. Cynthia Jane, so CJ, yes. I'm a fan of T.C. Boyle, the writer T.C. Boyle. Thomas, actually, he made up his middle name. His middle name really isn't Corrigesson, but he uses the name Thomas Corrigesson Boyle, but he has the initials T.C. And a lot of writers use their initials. Personal choice, I guess.
I just had an idea, like you have some copies here. If somebody for absolutely sure wants to buy one, could you leave it in the library to somehow coordinate with Mark that they could purchase it from you here? Would that work?
I don't want to put Mark to work with
Yeah.
book selling.
Yeah, thank
So,
you.
I mean, if somebody really wanted it,
Yeah.
or something.
Well, I mean, I don't do.
They have
you
a
all-
number of options.
I got it from Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That was really
Amazon
easy.
is probably,
Yeah.
it's handy, you'll get the book in a couple days.
Yep.
And it's it's pretty easy. I do sell it at a discount at my talks, but, yeah, Kindle version's available. So I'm hoping to do an audiobook at some point. I just haven't gotten it together because my publisher will do an audiobook, but it's extra. It's going to cost money, and not a little money. So I think I can put it together with a company. There are companies who will do it, and with AI, I don't want to do it with AI, but with AI, artificial intelligence, it's getting, technology just keeps onslaughting publishing. You can do AI voices on audiobooks, which is another kind of strange, interesting, wondrous thing, but I don't really like that idea. I like real people. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I just have to say I really enjoyed the book, especially the references to the Philadelphia area. There were a few of those where the character was in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And the Chester County references, and the romance. That was wonderful. And I really liked the fact that the book was satisfying at the end. Like you feel like everything came together and that there was closure. Some books you read, I don't feel like there's closure, like emotional, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
emotional closure.
True.
Like I just feel really good after reading it.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad. I wouldn't want anyone to feel bad. No, I think it's true that, and that was a question I had in my mind when I was doing the book. I thought, how do I want to end it, right? Do I want it to be open-ended? Do I want it to be, not very happy, or do I want it to be happy? And at the end, I thought, no, I really want it to be happy because I want her to be happy, because I care about her, and I want her life to be good. So yeah, I'm glad you liked that. I won't spoil it. It just has a happy ending, but no, that's fine. I won't say what it is, but yes, yeah.
I was gonna say, that's important, because the last book I read, it was an old book, I don't remember the author. The whole book was really interesting, and then when it got to the end, like, that's it?
Yes.
Like, what, huh?
Yes.
Like you want a good ending.
You feel jilted.
Yeah.
Like you're like, I
Yeah.
I was
invested
very
all this
disappointed.
time into this
Yeah.
book and you gave me this.
And then it just falls apart,
Yes, exactly.
That is important.
Yeah.
And as far as the local color, we were talking about that a little bit before, the Chester County area and the roadways and so on. And she does go into Philadelphia, and yes, we do have familiar streets in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia back then, of course, might have had about 30,000 people in it, which is kind of funny, right? But it was a fairly small space. It certainly wasn't the huge megalopolis that it is now. So it was a fairly small place, and there are place names in there that you will recognize. And actually, I also have St. David's Church, if you know where that is, in Radnor. Episcopal Church is in there too, when it was just a little stone building, So, yeah.
I read the book a while ago, but didn't you say something in the book about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or some poet who had referenced?
Oh, Andrew Marvell.
Okay.
Andrew, yeah, Coleridge came a little later. Yes, Marvell, it is a poet that they would have not, and John Donne.
Okay.
So I think I have Marvell in there. I'm trying to remember. I know I have John Donne in there. Yeah, and he would have been a poet that they would have not known, because Donne would have been really kind of a 16th into 17th century poet. And Marvell is in there, and also there's mention of I was going to say Willem Dafoe. That's the actor. Popular culture. Daniel Defoe. Daniel Defoe, he's mentioned in there, and Robinson Crusoe. Yeah, and Ma Flanders is mentioned in there. Yeah, so we do have some literary references.
Beverly online has a suggestion to get to order your book. She says that you might ask Reeds and Company if they would order you one if you aren't interested in purchasing it online.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
don't know whether they do that, but
Reeds, they
could
might
ask.
order it for you, if you ask them, but I'm actually gonna go into Reeds, and I'm gonna take a couple books, and I'm gonna say, hey, you guys, I have some books here, you know, can we sell them on consignment or something like that? Because I would like to get it into there. It's just really, really hard, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of books being published, more than ever, and bookstores don't have shelf space for every book. They make decisions about that. What do we want to carry, you know? And a store like Barnes & Noble, and then a smaller store like Reeds and Company, even a smaller space, and the main point books, which does have my book, but they're tiny, you know? So they have to make decisions about what they're going to carry. It's hard.
yes, it will be available at the library. Gwen, thank you.
Okay.
And are you recording this so that somebody from Reeds could look at it? You could
Yeah, once it's
tell them to
posted,
take
sure.
a look at it and
Oh, okay,
they could
yes.
hear
Yeah.
the comments that were made
Yeah.
here tonight.
You have to do your own marketing as an author, and it's not just a small press author, but even Valentine Books. I mean, unless you're the 1%, the 1%ers of authors who make money from writing and have names that people know, then you get help with your advertising. Then it gets marketed. But if you're down in the lower rungs, you don't get help with marketing, not much. So you have to do it all yourself. You have to look for places to speak. You have to try to get your book placed. You know, it's a lot of work. It's after you publish your book, that's part of it, and then what comes after, you know, because you want people to read it, and so you have to push it and push it and push it. Yeah.
Just wondering, did you have another job, or has it become your full-time job?
This is my job now. I left the newspaper in 2006, and I taught for a while. I got my MFA, and I did some teaching at the college level for about 4 years, and I stopped doing that, and I just decided I wanted to really write, and so that's what I'm doing. It's not a living, but for me, it's like an enjoyment living. Like, it's a living, I'm lucky enough that I don't still have to be out doing a job.
Comment from Beverly on Zoom, sounds like writing the book is the easy part.
Yeah, writing the book is the easy part. Well, you know what, writers write, okay, but they're not good marketers. Usually, they're not very good at getting out there and pushing the book. So in some ways, the writing is a little easier because you know that craft, and you do it, and you're doing it by yourself in your little room, and you're making this story, and it's all yours, and but then once it's done, it is very hard because then you have to get it into the world, and so a lot of work has to come afterwards, for sure. Yeah.
Just thought of something else. After you wrote it, did you have an outside person do the editing and proofreading and all that, or how did you do it since it was your first book?
Excuse me. Well, I had some readers on the book, and I also, early on, I had a woman look at part of the book, an editor, professional editor, and so she helped me out with kind of getting the book. She gave me some good feedback, so I was able to take that and go back and rework the front of the book, and I did that. And then the publisher, so I rewrote it, and I did have eyes on it, and then the publisher had editors there who went through it, and so it was just kind of a whole process of gradually getting it into shape. Yeah.
Any final comments from anyone on Zoom?
Yeah, I have a question, another question about the cover. How much input did you have about the cover?
Oh, yes, thank you. Well, I totally love the cover. I totally love the cover, thank you. Yes, I actually had input on the cover. They had a cover designer at the publisher, so I worked with him to come up with an idea for it. So what I did was I looked around at other historical fiction covers to get an idea of, is there anything there that I liked? And I sent them pictures of a colonial outfit I have, and I sent it off to them and I said, well, now here's an example of a colonial outfit. And so they worked on it, and I had a vision for what kinds of things I wanted to have there. I knew I wanted a woman, and we don't see her face, which I kind of like. But she is in a colonial outfit, colonial era outfit. You can see the top of her gown here. It's laced up in the front. She's got a fichu or a handkerchief on at her throat, and she's got mitts on, fingerless mitts that she might use for working outside. And then, of course, you get the Revolutionary War soldiers down at the bottom in the middle of a fight. So that kind of, I thought that was a nice overview of what this book contains and what it's about. So yeah, and I love the cover. I'm just very happy with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good, it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Okay.
Anyone else? Great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay, you are welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.